Give me a chance to lead this institution according to the ideals that we stand for. Not to crucify me just because I come from some country. Some of you maybe feel like...
Will there be a day where the colonial and paternalistic attitude of the West towards Africa come to an end? Till today, the West still views Africa from the lens of colonialism, and that is why Western leaders see nothing wrong in demeaning Africa and its leaders. However, not every African leader will keep quiet in the face of Western paternalistic attitudes. Recently, the president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Dr. Tulia Ackson, shut down Western ministers who questioned her visit to Russia in a demeaning manner. If you watch the entire video, you will be appalled at the attitude of these Western ministers, and we are pretty sure it's because she is from Africa. These ministers didn't even give her the respect she deserves as the president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, but she gave it back to them really hot. Now, before we continue, we would like you to watch this video.
Give me a chance to lead this institution according to the ideals that we stand for. Not to crucify me just because I come from some country. Some of you maybe feel like we are still colonized in the mind. No. No, we are not. No, we are not. So, please.
The Inter-Parliamentary Union is an international organization of different national parliaments all around the world, and its primary purpose is to promote democratic governance, accountability, and cooperation among its members. However, the IPU is also tasked with the arbitration of conflicts. Interestingly, this organization was established in 1889 by France and the UK, and initially started with 8 members, all of which are from the West. Today, it has over 180 members from different parliaments across the world. Now, the president of the IPU, Dr. Tulia Ackson, is a Tanzanian who is incidentally the second female to hold this position. As we stated earlier, one of the duties of the IPU is conflict arbitration, which means that it usually acts as a third-party mediator in the face of global conflicts. This means that the IPU has been involved in the current conflicts around the world, such as the one between Ukraine and Russia, Palestine and Israel, and that of Israel and Lebanon, and by extension, Iran. Now, as you know, in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the West has fully given their support to Ukraine and tagged Russia as the world's greatest enemy. This means that the West expects every country in the world to automatically regard Russia as an enemy. And any country that continues to regard Russia as an ally is regarded by the West as an enemy, or in the case of African countries, are tagged simpletons easily influenced by Russia. Now, as part of her duty, the president of the IPU, Dr. Tulia, decided to pay a visit to Russia and Ukraine in order to engage in parliamentary dialogue with these countries. According to her, her initial plan was to start with Ukraine. However, when she reached out to Ukraine regarding her plans to visit, the officials in Ukraine responded that the president of Ukraine and the speaker would not be available because they would be traveling to New York for the NATO meeting. She couldn't possibly stop them, right? So, she decided to visit Russia instead, where she met with President Putin and engaged in dialogue as was her duty. But guess what? The Western ministers that are a part of the IPU decided that Dr. Tulia has committed a grave sin for daring to visit Russia, and they decided to call her to question her actions. These Western ministers gathered together to question Dr. Tulia in a very demeaning and paternalistic manner. Listen to this.
President, I would like to ask you about your last trip to Russia. What did you feel when shaking hands with the war criminal Putin from a terrorist regime in Russia? What especially mandated you, who especially mandated you to represent the IPU, and what benefit did this visit bring to democracy and not to Russian propaganda? Do you agree that your visit to Russia before visiting victim country Ukraine was a mistake, and do you regret it? Thank you.
Did you hear that? This minister from the country of Lithuania said, "Who mandated the president of the IPU to represent the IPU?" What sort of question is that? Dr. Tulia is the president of the IPU, and it is her responsibility to represent the IPU in any capacity. But because she dared to visit Russia, these Western ministers now feel that she is in no capacity to represent the IPU. That is crazy. But fortunately, Dr. Tulia didn't allow these ministers to demean her and make her feel that she did something bad. Before we continue, we want to remind you to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe so you can get more videos like this. Now, in a respectful and bold manner, she laid down her point on why she visited Russia and told these Western ministers to keep shut and give her the respect that she deserves. First of all, she started by saying that since she took the mantle of becoming president of the IPU in October last year, she has tried her best to do her duty objectively and without any partiality. She recounted how she visited Palestine and Israel in November last year and explained that she has no intention of ignoring any of the conflicts happening around the world. Dr. Tulia explicitly stated that the IPU was not created just for the conflict in the Middle East or the West, but for every conflict happening around the world, including those in Africa. Then, she went on to explain why she visited Russia before Ukraine and proceeded to blast the Western ministers for criticizing her decision. Please watch this.
You're asking here who mandated me? Who mandated the former president who came from the 12 plus to visit Kiev? Who mandated him? Please, I think we have to reach a point where I have explained myself several times to you 12 plus, to everybody else who cared to understand. If you have a feeling like I went to Russia without going to Ukraine first, I have told you several times, letters were sent out. I wouldn't turn out my visit to Russia because I'm unable to reach Ukraine. You didn't ask me similar questions when I visited Israel, did you? You didn't ask me similar questions when I visited Palestine, did you? You're not going to ask me similar questions when I visit Sudan.
Dr. Tulia is absolutely right. These Western ministers didn't ask her who mandated her when she visited Israel and Palestine in November. And the fact is, they wouldn't ask a similar question when she eventually visits Sudan or any other conflict-ridden country. The only reason they are asking this question is because she dared to visit Russia, the enemy of the West. To the West, visiting Russia is propaganda. In fact, when it comes to Russia, everything is propaganda. But isn't that hypocritical of the West? In the context of the Russian and Ukraine war, Ukraine is viewed as a victim by the West. However, this same Ukraine has launched missiles and deadly military weapons, which has led to the death of thousands of Russians. So, just because Ukraine is viewed as a victim in this war, doesn't mean that Russia is not also affected by the war. There are innocent citizens in Russia that the war has affected. But typical of the West, they do not care about this, choosing to condemn Russia, including its citizens. The fact is that the IPU was created for conflict arbitration in any country with no exception, and the West has no right to dictate which country the IPU should serve. As Dr. Tulia stated in the video, she is simply carrying out her duty, and the fact that she decided to visit Russia without visiting Ukraine doesn't make her a monster.
I was requested by the task force to do what I did. What did I do wrong? I was supposed to sit back and tie my hands and say there's nothing we can do as IPU. That will not be doing justice to the women and children of Ukraine who are suffering. That wouldn't be fair to the mandate that you have given me. Give me a chance to lead this institution according to the ideals that we stand for. Not to crucify me just because I come from some country. Some of you maybe feel like we are still colonized in the mind. No. No, we are not. No, we are not. So please, let's respect each other.
Yes, as Dr. Tulia said, these Western ministers probably felt that they could intimidate her because she is from Africa. But, as she said, Africa is no longer colonized, and Africans are smart people who stand for what they believe. The actions of these Western ministers are not surprising. It is the typical attitude of the West towards Africa. The West believes it is more superior and civilized than Africans, and Africans ought to just jump when the West says so. In fact, the West thinks that Africans cannot think for themselves, and this can be traced far back to the 19th century during the slave trade era. During this period, an American physician claimed that any African slave who wanted to be free was suffering from a mental illness known as drapetomania. Shocking, right? But what's even more shocking is that the West believed this man and drapetomania became a popular notion to describe any African slave who ran away from his master. This is crazy. These people actually believe that the natural position of any African is to be a slave. So the idea that any African desires freedom has to be a sickness. It didn't end here, though. During the 1930s, Africans in the US were regarded as 3/5 of a human being. In fact, in some parts of Africa, like South Africa, Africans were considered as flora and fauna. So, when Africans in the diaspora and in the continent began to fight for their freedom and independence, the West, in particular the US, couldn't fathom or believe the idea. So, it concluded that the Soviet Union was behind the agitation for independence. Somehow, the US concluded that African fathers of independence, including Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Fred Hampton, were Russian agents. It's no wonder then that the majority of them were killed by the West. In South Africa, for instance, during the apartheid struggle, the prime minister at the time stated that any black person that is not happy under the apartheid regime are those who had been influenced by Russia. However, things have changed from how they used to be. Some African leaders have grown a backbone and have refused to allow the West continue treating Africa in that colonial manner. This is why countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso kicked out French troops and ended things with France and the West because it was obvious that these people would never change. And for African countries that continue to deal with the West, some of them have made it known that they will only deal with the West from a place of equality. And if that is not in the picture, then they are ready to ditch the West in favor of non-Western countries. This is definitely a new era in African and Western relationships. The earlier the West recognizes this, the better for them. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.